Welcome to Facing the Moment, brought to you by the Foundation for Self-Leadership. In these episodes, we will address various crises and focus on how to navigate them with abundant fortitude and a bit of hope. As we discuss relevant observations together, we will identify meaningful actions that will generate valuable insights. You can download all episodes on Apple Music, Spotify, and YouTube.
I welcome our listeners to this episode, which will focus on a conversation around autism. Autism touches countless individuals across ages and affects their families and circles. Despite what neuroscience research has taught us, this neurological makeup remains generally misunderstood, shrouded in confusion, fear, and judgment. Response to it by autistic individuals or those interacting with them varies significantly. The DSM-5, the latest psychiatry manual, refers to it as the autism spectrum disorder and uses words like deficiency to describe it. I'm not a fan at all of either term, to say the least. Many, probably most, autistic individuals have highly productive lives and successful engagements at work and at home. Some have learned to mask it. Some families feel overwhelmed and alone, while others have adapted beautifully and may not have yet begun to understand how autism feels like on the inside. To shed more light, introduce greater clarity, and help cultivate appropriate skills, we intend in this episode to explore what is scientifically known about autism and, perhaps more importantly, to help reframe how the world looks at autistic individuals and how they themselves may rediscover what goes on inside. We will explore autism with greater curiosity and compassion, with a nuanced perspective, perhaps by honoring the difficulties and unique ways that autistic individuals experience emotions, social interactions, and relationships, as well as the world around them. What might autism teach us about nervous signals, overwhelm, sensitivity, connection, and the basic need to be understood, not just to be managed? To help me unpack all of that, I'm grateful and privileged to be joined by Sarah Bergenfield, MA CAS. Thank you for joining me, Sarah.
Thank you for having me. It's so nice to be here.
Good to have you. Sarah Bergenfield, who is IFS-trained, provides support to autistic individuals by combining neuroscience, IFS, and somatic awareness to help them understand how their autistic brain, body, and mind perceive and respond to the world around them. Sarah offers consultation to clinicians and works with groups. She has co-authored her first book, Wired to Feel, and is working on her second one. I heard Sarah present at a virtual IFS conference a few years ago and was inspired by her approach, which is informed by her understanding of autism as a struggle to predict and rapidly adjust to shifting external conditions. This, as I gathered from her writing, gives rise to a hyper state of focus on the present, low tolerance for uncertainty, deep connection to places or things, high emotional activation in the face of surprises, and the feeling that one is watching the world in isolation from it, among other shared experiences. So again, Sarah, welcome. What would you like to add about you that would be relevant to our conversation today?
I guess I should add that I am a diagnosed autistic. I come from a family of autistics. I have an autistic child, and siblings and other family members. So we've all sort of been living this experience without even realizing that we were living this experience together, which is always interesting.
Well, thank you for sharing all that. And I'm sure we'll benefit from your personal experience, lived experience, and your professional experience around this very important topic. So let's start by painting the big picture, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Why do you think that autism is a highly emotionally charged topic for individuals, families, and society as a whole? Mm-hmm. Or do you even see it that way?
Well, I would start by saying that I don't, personally, for me, it isn't. I think for the culture and for the world, and well, I can't say the world, but let's just stick with American culture, it does seem to be. But I also think that everything is charged right now. I think we have moved into a time where everybody has an opinion. And we have an exchange of opinions and thoughts and ideas happening at an incredibly rapid pace across multiple platforms with little to no editing and or accountability. And so I think that, the idea of autism being particularly charged, I don't think it is. I think it's no more charged than so many other things that are in sort of the public awareness right now. I think Robert F. Kennedy didn't do us a service, or did us a huge disservice, I should say, when with what he said about autism and, eradicating it and his, Tylenol ideas. And he certainly hasn't helped the public discourse around it. But I feel that the attention that autism is currently being given I think that's just the way culture goes. It's one thing and then it's another thing and then another thing. And for those outside of it, for those living with the condition, it's different, right? Because we're constantly trying to navigate how to live in a world that isn't designed for us.
Yes. Well, I very much appreciate that perspective, and I appreciate you bringing us to the moment, so that we're not discussing it in isolation of the conditions external to it. Right? How people look at it, how people all of a sudden become excited about an idea, whether right or wrong, and they amplify it, and it becomes the conversation of the day.
Right. And that's not the conversation that we need to be having. Right. And I think it's really important for us all to keep that in mind, that, I could post a picture of my dog to Instagram and I would get, thousands of comments saying one thing and thousands saying another thing. And because that's just where we're at in the culture, is that people like to have an opinion and they love to share it, regardless of the impact that opinion may or may not be having on somebody.
Yeah,
so
yeah. I like you said, unfiltered, without much thought given to it sometimes.
Yeah. Certainly not self-led.
Yeah, that's what we have to navigate for sure.
Right. Definitely.
And I'm sure you'll tell me what that means later on, the notion of being self-led. So just to set the language, and language speaks volumes. What are descriptors, words, phrases used in the field to refer to autistic individuals? Might you please place them in context for us and maybe share your own preferences?
Sure. So I'll start by saying that I refer to myself as an autistic. That's just me. I don't want to police anybody else's language, and I don't like to have my language policed. I feel like we all have the right to refer to ourselves in whatever way feels comfortable to us. So I want to start by saying that. You will hear people say, I'm an autistic, or I'm a person with autism. You'll hear the word neurodivergence used a lot. You'll hear autist, which I've heard recently, which is interesting. I kind of like that because it reminds me of artist. But I think that the language that's out there, people are becoming very descriptive and very creative with the ways that they're trying to explain who they are and how they fit in the world. In terms of contextualizing it, I have to say I am not particularly good at that because I stay on the outside edges of the culture. I always have. I've always lived my life on the outside edges, and I remain on the outside edges. So in terms of social media and stuff, I am not the person to ask about, what is sort of common on social media and what the more popular terms are. I'm afraid I don't know because I don't live in those spaces.
Yeah, and you made a very important point. It's not what the common language dictates. It's how people prefer to be referred to, and to honor that. And I've already used that in the intro. I would refer to individuals with autism as autistic individuals in this episode. So there are clearly myths and misunderstandings about autism. Might you share some with us, some that you've come across that need to be properly addressed?
Sure. I mean, the most common ones we see and hear are if you are somebody like me who has what's considered level 1 autism, meaning that, I mask and I function relatively well in the world, and I come across as somebody who's engaged and engaging. One of the things you'll commonly hear is, oh, well, you don't look autistic, or you don't seem autistic, or you don't have autism, right? So you'll be corrected on your diagnosis fairly often because of the misunderstandings of the condition and the stereotyping of the condition. So if you think about autism, people typically think about young boys sitting alone, lining up toys, or playing off in a corner, or having sort of behavioral dysregulations, more visible aspects of autism. Of course, we had the Rain Man movie back in there. I forget when it was, I guess the early 90s. And that did a lot to sort of cement the societal idea of what autism looks like, when in fact it is a condition that can present in various different ways and in various different levels, right? So if you're diagnosed as either level 1, 2, or 3, and that level is determined by the amount of support that you need to function in the world. That's how they determine it. We also know that autistic traits and characteristics can be masked. We know that traits and characteristics will become more visible when demands exceed capacity. And that language is actually one of the notes in the DSM-5. So the more demands placed on an autistic system, the greater the level of dysregulation. And then the greater the level of dysregulation, the more characteristics you're going to see. So it really is, some people don't even like to use the word spectrum. And again, I respect other people's preferences. I'm totally okay using the word spectrum. I think that we all exist, that those of us with autism do exist within that sort of continuum. And my experience of autism is very, very different to, say, somebody who has level 3 autism. And I want to always be respectful of that, because I think that one of the things that has happened in the last few years is that a lot of attention has gone to people with my kind of level of autism. And it's not that we didn't deserve the attention, we do, but it can't be at a cost to those who have a higher level of autism, right? So, me parenting my autistic child was different to a parent of a level 3 autistic child who is nonverbal and, just runs away from home and in the middle of the night, and, they have to put locks on the doors and they can't communicate, and they have, lots of sort of more intense behavioral outbursts, and their lives are so deeply impacted by caring for a family member with that level. And so, yes, we share the condition, but the experience of the condition is entirely different. And so we always want to sort of send a lot of love out to those families and people dealing with those sorts of family members with those sorts of challenges and difficulties.
Yes, indeed. And you're reminding us that it is not appropriate and certainly not advisable to attach ourselves to stereotypes, right? And this is something that is so common in the culture, not only for this group of individuals, but many different ways that people want to attach labels and stereotypes. And maybe it's to meet their desire to understand, but that's so limiting and that's so simplifying the reality out there. So you're encouraging us to really do our due diligence, think hard, show compassion, refrain from putting people in boxes, because no two individuals are alike.
Yeah, definitely. And I like what you said about a desire to sort of understand. And that's sometimes why we stereotype. And I do think it comes from that place. I totally see the world now through the lens of predictive processing and what it's like to live with uncertainty. And I think that as humans, we spend our whole lives trying to minimize uncertainty and create as much predictability in our lives as possible, both consciously and subconsciously. Stereotyping does that. right? Stereotyping offers us someone somewhere or a series of people or a series of systems have given you a set of characteristics that describe a particular condition, in this case, autism, right? If you continue to hold that belief system about what autism is, you are actually minimizing the uncertainty around the condition. But over time, you're actually creating a much larger problem because, yes, you may be reducing the uncertainty in the moment by sticking to what you've been told. But, you know, as we always talk about using IFS, right, if you can't be sort of creative and curious in your thinking, you can't help to redefine things. And that's really what we need to do. And then it's as we redefine things and we allow for these other expressions of autism and different presentations, then that's actually when we create a much more sort of stable and predictable framework for how do we describe people whose brains work in this particular way.
Yeah. At the risk of looking for patterns, just to remind us that we just talked about the fact that no group is a monolith, right? And individuals are unique. Their experiences are unique. Their background is unique. Their makeup is unique. Their genetic profile is unique, let's say. But as someone who has worked extensively with autistic adults, have you noticed any patterns? Any common characteristics that might help us understand their lived experiences, again, knowing that no two individuals are alike?
Yes. So I certainly do see patterns, and I see patterns in two different realms. I see patterns created by the neurological condition, right? So autism. And then I see patterns created by the world, the way the world reacts to us as autistics. So if we sort of split it down into sort of our brain-based experiences of the world as autistics, you're going to see a low tolerance of uncertainty. So, and the way that we deal with that is we like a lot of sameness, as much predictability as possible. You'll see us getting sort of agitated, anywhere from mildly agitated to extremely upset if something that we weren't expecting happens, if there's a change to a plan, if we can't find something we were looking for, if we are very routine driven, as many of us are, not all of us are, but many of us are, and something disrupts that routine, that's going to be agitating. You'll see a difference in the way we socialize. It's typically easier for us to socialize and organize around hobbies or interests or particular topics. You'll see lots of sort of fixed interests, which we describe as like rabbit holes or doing deep dives or special interests, right? That we really get very, very invested into a particular topic. We like to learn everything we can about it, and then we love to talk about it. And that's how we like to socialize, right? That's how we like to connect, is through those topics. You'll see sensory differences, typically sensitivities or reactivities, as it's described. So a heightened reactivity to sound, for example, or touch or smell. We often like to eat the same or very similar kinds of foods and textures, wear the same or similar kinds of clothing, whether it's colors or fabrics. We sort of move through the world trying to limit the unpredictability that is caused by everything, right? Everything has like what I call an uncertainty score. That's the expression that I use. And so we're constantly trying to minimize that. And most of the time we do that without even realizing it. We don't really know what we're doing. We just know that we just feel better when we do this. So those would be the neurological aspects. And then what I see, the commonalities and the emotional piece of it, is the way the world responds to us is that I have yet to meet an autistic client or person who feels like they belong, who feels like they're understood, who hasn't been confused for much of their life by the responses of the people around them to things that they may say, things that they may do. So those are some of the more sort of common emotional patterns that we see. And when I just want to add a caveat to the word belong, it's that it's hard for us to exist in non-autistic groups because we're not understood, because we may say something that to us seems like a perfectly reasonable thing to say. And the rest of the group, it doesn't fit within those norms for that particular group. And so in terms of belonging, we may feel actually okay not belonging to these larger groups. But most of the, if not all of the autistic clients that I work with, we have all had that experience of being conscious of not belonging. The impact of that not belonging differs, but we have all been conscious of not belonging.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what I hear you say is there is comfort in the familiar.
Very much so.
And then there is a need, a desire to be seen, accepted, understood. And I'm sorry to hear that the world doesn't provide that. I mean, almost like shame on us, right? And then the notion of belonging is a tricky one, actually, right? Because belonging inadvertently suggests you have to assimilate.
Right.
That someone decides what the predominant group is and everybody else has to belong to it. I actually have an allergic reaction to that notion. I like it. It sounds romantic. It sounds poetic. It sounds like an ideal. I prefer the word connection. That, why do you have to belong to my group? Maybe I need to belong to your group. Maybe we don't need to belong. We have to remain individual and individualistic, that is, but yet facilitate a sense of community, right? I remember a quote by Gibran when he talked about marriage, actually, but it's applicable in many other settings. And I'm going to paraphrase terribly. But it's like, in that relationship, almost like remain individual, right? Remain as an individual, but yet let their spaces between you where the angels of heaven can dance, right? Beautiful. So, you have to have your own dignity as a person, but be part of a community. But that's not the same as belonging in my humble view of things.
I like that.
Yeah, because the world dictates what belonging is. And I've seen it time and time again.
Right. And that sort of came up in a way in your very first question where I was talking about the way the world is reacting to autism, but how basically the culture as a whole now is just reacting to everything, right? Everybody wants to have an opinion. Because I think everybody is both looking for the push and the pull of belonging. They want to belong, and at the same time, they want to be highly individualized, right? And so we've sort of moved into a culture of, we post things online, for example, and we watch the amount of interaction it has, right? So how many likes do we get? Right, those kinds of things, and I personally blame Facebook for starting this whole thing when they came up with that platform where you could put a picture online of your dinner and have 100 people like it, and then you put a picture the next night of your dinner and only 10 people like it, and what does that mean, and what do we do with that? And so this idea of belonging has become really messy. I think it's always been messy for me personally, because I haven't ever felt that deep sense of belonging in the human world. But I feel deeply, deeply, deeply connected to the natural world. Like to my dogs, for example. I have 2 of them here asleep on the floor next to me, and I'm looking at the trees, and I love to listen to the birds. And that's my sense of belonging. So I sort of feel like I belong in the larger scale of the universe, but within the smaller grouping system that humans use. I typically don't. I have never felt that I belong in a particular group, but I've actually always been okay with that.
And that's beautiful, right? Because it's a personal choice at the end of the day, as long as you feel whole about it.
Right.
I mean,
right.
And that's a beautiful personal story about how you belong to a natural environment by choice and maybe by default. Yeah. So let's talk briefly about your book, Sarah, Wired to Feel, and congratulations to you and Martha Sweezy,
Thank you.
Your co-author. What does the title mean? Maybe take us a little deeper than the obvious image it creates for us, and maybe to talk to us about the sensitivity to feelings to which you're referring.
Okay, so the title Wired to Feel comes from basically the thesis of the book, which is what I studied for my master's. And I wrote my master's thesis on this topic, which is that autism, rather than being a condition that is sort of considered to be in the head, like very cognitive based or intellectualized, it's really a condition that affects every aspect of us. So because of the way our brains work in terms of how we create our predictions of the world, we overweight the importance of a lot of sensory data. So what overweighting means is that our brains can't tune out unnecessary sensory data the way a non-autistic brain can. So autism has typically been characterized as a lack of connection, a lack of feeling, a deficit. In fact, the word autism comes from the Greek word autos, which means, and it was used to describe what they called a morbid withdrawal into self. Right. So just the word alone describes a set of characteristics of the condition that are very, very, very negative and based in very much a deficit framework, where autistics are sort of held back from the world and we're not really experiencing everything that's going on around us. We're just focusing on our own experiences. And that's just not the case. And in my research for my master's thesis, and there's a ton of really wonderful peer-reviewed papers to sort of back this up, we are actually overly connected to the world because of the difference in the predictive mechanisms of our brain and the overweighting of sensory data. We connect to everything. We may not want to, right? But we cannot necessarily tune out, or a lot of the time we can't tune out. So anyone who's listening to this, or as you're sitting in your room and I'm sitting in mine, there's if you sort of think of it like a computer, there's, millions and millions of bits of data coming in constantly that the brain is processing, right? So in order for the brain to be able to do that, it has to decide, what do I pay attention to and what can I ignore? And we call that noise versus signal. So a non-autistic brain is more effective at tuning out noise, right? Data that doesn't need to be paid attention to, than an autistic brain. So a brain like mine, as I'm sitting here talking, I'm aware of everything in my room. There's a plane flying overhead. The mailman just, dropped the mail at the mailbox at the end of my driveway. My dogs are asleep on the floor here. I'm listening to them breathing. I had my TV on earlier and it's just on like a home screen thing, but I can see out the corner of my eye, the light is cycling through. So all of that is being processed. Now, I'm really good at keeping my attention on something that I find interesting, right? Most autistics are. And so I'm very engaged in this conversation, but my brain is not able to tune out all of those other bits of data the way a non-autistic brain can. So rather than being disconnected from the world, I'm actually overly connected to the world and I'm wired to feel. And that's how we came up with the title of the book. And kudos to the publishers who actually came up with the final title, because it just describes it so perfectly. But I really am trying to help people understand that an autistic family member, if you have one, or if you have an autistic friend, or if you yourself are autistic and you do find yourself, sort of spending a lot of time alone or a lot of time in your own experience, it's not because you can't connect to the world. It's because you have so much connectivity that your brain and your body are constantly trying to manage your resources, right? Your metabolic resources and your emotional resources to allow you to continue sort of, as much activity as possible and continue to survive.
Well, thank you for really helping shift the perspective of autism as being a deficit to being almost like a hyper attentive to every single signal around us, which is certainly a unique characteristic. And clearly it comes with some challenges.
Sure.
Right? Because you might, and the question I have for you is, in your case, speaking for yourself and maybe for some of the clients you've had, then how are you able to prioritize which of these signals requires your response or your maybe hyper attention?
It depends on the situation. I mean, I am extremely routine driven. Extremely. I wake up at almost exactly the same time every day. I, drink my morning coffee from the exact same mug every day. If I can't find that mug, I get stuck. I sort of have like a little roadblock. So thankfully I tend to know where it is, and I wash it and I put it out the night before. So I always have access to it. I wear, the same kinds of clothes all the time. I love to have my dogs around me. They're very, very grounding for me because they're very predictable. They're well behaved. They're sort of limited in how many surprises they bring, other than when they start barking if somebody comes to the house. In terms of the focusing, we have to work harder in some ways. So if I, for example, it really does depend on the context. So if I'm at home and I'm working and I'm seeing my clients, I don't have to work very hard to focus because I'm such a routine-driven person that each of those things kind of slots into its place during the day, and that keeps my whole system running. So I can see a day of clients, or I can go and present to hundreds of people, for example. Like those kinds of things are great, really good for me because I'm interested in the topic and I like to teach. And so it makes it makes the event itself go very easily for me. But if you take me out of that situation and put me into a different context, say if some, friends unexpectedly come to the house, or even if I know that they're coming, or, kids come home, we have lots of kids. If kids come home and they bring friends, and I love when all the kids are here, but that introduces a lot more uncertainty. Right. And so the more uncertainty there is in any given situation, the more I have to work at it. And I would say that is going to be the same or similar for almost every autistic, even if they don't quite understand it in those terms. So I like to have people use an uncertainty scoring system. And I talked about it earlier, just in terms of for any situation or any day, score how much uncertainty is present. The higher the score, the harder you're going to have to work, right? And the worse you're going to feel. The lower the score, the better you're going to feel, and the easier it will be for you.
That's very helpful. My guess is when that routine is broken or influenced by external conditions, the response might be one of anxiety, exhaustion, burnouts, being stuck, like you said earlier. How would you like others in your vicinity, in your presence, to respond to that? What is the best way for us to respond to a situation of the sort?
Well, that's a lovely question. Thank you for asking that question. I want to just bring attention to you used the word anxiety, and I'm always more careful when I use that word because a lot of autistic behavior gets labeled as anxiety. It's fairly common for autistics to be diagnosed with like generalized anxiety disorder or conditions of anxiety, when I actually believe personally that it's arousal, it's nervous system arousal. That we are constantly throughout the day having these spikes in our nervous system caused by uncertainty, right? So remember the uncertainty scoring. The higher the score, right, the higher the level of arousal is going to be. So there's a difference between arousal and anxiety. So arousal is the nervous system response to the presence of something uncertain. Anxiety is the story that we tell ourselves about the cause of that or what that means, right? So keeping those two separate is really, really important. So in answer to your question about what can people around us do, that's one of the first things you can do.
Okay,
is to not label it as anxiety, and to maybe help, if you have an autistic child or an autistic friend, to help them understand that perhaps what they're experiencing is this spike in arousal. And then you want to look at what's causing the arousal spike, right? Has something unexpected happened? Has there been a change in plans? Are your socks too tight? Is there a light that's too bright? Because not everything has an emotional cause, right? Some things do, but a lot of what we experience in the world has no emotional cause whatsoever. It's caused almost entirely environmentally or by changes in plans and expectations. That would be the first thing.
Yeah, so help me, if you don't mind, understand better how I might respond to that rise in arousal, because the last thing I want is to add another one or more signals that would get you in a vicious cycle.
Right.
And, more signals, more arousal, more signals.
So you can think of it in terms of when you have an autistic person who is experiencing a spike in arousal, anything that you do or say is going to be more information, more bits of data that then have to be processed by a system that's already overwhelmed. So I'll give you a super quick example. We flew home. We went to Colorado to see my son. We flew home yesterday. I hate flying. It's like, I actually don't mind the flying part of it. It's the airport and the lining up at the gate. I really have a hard time with it. And the gate yesterday was particularly chaotic. And I'm like sort of the person who I often pre-board if I can. And if I'm not able to do that, I'm the person that lines up, at the beginning of group number one, sort of 40 minutes ahead of boarding a plane, because I just don't want to have people around me. So yesterday was really chaotic. I was standing on line. I had my hat on. I'm doing some stimming. I'm sort of swaying. And my husband had been sitting down, and he makes his way over through the crowd, and he lets himself in like through the elastic thing, the gate thing that they use. And he comes through that, and he comes to stand next to me, and he can see that I'm having a spike in arousal from all the people around. And he rubs my arm in support. And he comes over and he says, "Are you okay, honey?" And he rubs my arm. Okay. So I immediately flinch, and I say to him, "Don't touch me." Not because I don't love him, not because I don't want his support. He's my person, he's my rock, but I don't want his support in that way, because his touch is something that I have no room for. I cannot process it because I am already so full from all of the activity around me and everything else that's going on, that there's no space for me to then process his touch.
Right. That's not what you need. You want reduction instead of increase in this.
Exactly. Exactly. But for him, that's sort of, that's how he likes to demonstrate his love and support, is he's very tactile. I'm much less tactile. I typically don't like to just sort of be spontaneously touched by people. I like people to, to check in and ask me if they can hug me or touch me or those sorts of things. So it's really just identifying what the person needs in that moment. The higher the level of arousal, I wouldn't even worry about doing that. I would just sort of stand close to them, try to, if there's a way to help them identify what caused the arousal spike. Perhaps they know, if they're like me and you're at an airport, what's caused the spike, and just stand close and you can be, very loving and supportive without offering, again, more information, more data for the person to process. And it's trial and error, right? But it's sort of building the.
So if I can take you back to that moment.
Sure.
Just to be more explicit, to help our listeners understand better, what would you have liked your husband to do? I mean, you said stand there, or would you have preferred that he said nothing, just stood there and be with you in the space?
Yes.
Maybe share a few thoughts about the ideal response from him that would have helped you navigate the moment.
In that moment, that would have been my preferred response, for him to just come and stand quietly beside me. If he could have in some way sort of created a little bit of a barrier between me and the other people lining up at the gate. You know, it can get pretty jostly in there with backpacks and luggage and that kind of stuff. Those are the things that I appreciate the most, as opposed to, you know, I don't need him to say anything. I definitely don't want to be touched in those moments, but I do really appreciate him just being close and him sort of understanding that this is what's happening in my system. And all he needs to do is just sort of, don't try to fix it.
Yes.
Right. There's nothing to be fixed. There's nothing for me to fix. So there's certainly nothing for him to fix.
Yes. Well, in this case, you know what you needed. It's probably not always obvious that a person knows what is needed.
Right.
But what you're saying is resist the temptation to solve the problem, because really there's no problem. It's just a natural response.
Just life.
Yes, natural response to certain conditions.
Right.
And just be there, show support, and, you know, and like you said, hopefully, you know, those individuals commonly interacting with autistic individuals will learn how to behave best in such conditions. I think.
Right. And it's a great, very loving conversation to have afterwards. Right. So you want to wait for the arousal spike to go down. And then you can say, honey, when that happens next time, what would be helpful?
Yeah.
What would you like me to do?
And this is a great lesson that I would think can be extrapolated beyond interacting with an autistic individual. Anybody in a situation where they're activated, right, don't need someone to come and fix it for them. Right. We see it in all sorts of interactions. You know, when there's an impulsive response to help, that kind of help is not needed. It's in the eyes of the helper rather than in the eyes of the being helped, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And don't shame, don't judge, you know, don't say, or pull yourself together, or what's wrong with you, or why can't you do this? Or, you know, sometimes people can get embarrassed by a dysregulated person, and there's no need to shame or blame, or you can just show loving, very soft and gentle support.
So we're talking about your husband, and brings to mind parents and families of autistic individuals in their spaces, you know, people they love, people they care for. What are some of the significant challenges that those individuals experience from your life and from your clients' lives when they realize the loved one is autistic? And it, you know, that individual requires a different kind of interaction, which is, you know, life is about learning and growing for all of us, right?
Right.
But for sure. What would you think are those specific challenges? You shared one, the desire to help, that we need to kind of reframe and rethink about. What are some other challenges, and what can we do about them to be a greater presence for those who need us?
Some of it depends on the age of the person, right? So if you're a parent of a child who's recently diagnosed with autism, or diagnosed at birth even, you are going to face some challenges. I would say don't worry about setting a bad precedent. So I know that I hear this a lot from parents who are sort of told, well, you know, don't give in to your child, don't spoil your child, don't, you know, your child has to learn, they have to learn to be adaptable, they have to learn how to go to the grocery store. I would say ditch all of that, because you can make your life so much easier and the life of your child so much more pleasant by choosing your battles, right? So if your child wants to eat chicken nuggets every day, give them chicken nuggets every day. Maybe they do spend their whole life eating chicken nuggets. That's okay, right? If they want to wear the same clothing to school every day, let them wear the same clothes. It's okay. Don't sort of try to introduce things because you think that by introducing new things, you're going to sort of build their sense of the world. It doesn't work that way for us, right? The foods that we like to eat, the clothes that we like to wear, those are the ways that we regulate ourselves. And so if you're trying to introduce something different to your child, the chances are there's going to be some level of dysregulation. And then once there's dysregulation, then you're going to sort of have that head-to-head meeting with the child, right? Where the child is clearly saying, I don't want that, I don't like that. But the parent is thinking, this is actually good for you. Just eat this food, or just try this new experience, or just go to this party, or just, right? See if you can work with your child to empower them in the ways that they learn to regulate themselves. And just like my husband and I have had conversations about the things that I need, you can have those conversations with your child, right? So get really curious about it, be open to it, understand that it is challenging for you as a non-autistic to be in relationship with an autistic person. So you are going to have to do the work to understand the condition, right? But it's no different to any other condition. You know, if you had diabetes or a seizure disorder or something else, right? You would educate yourself about that condition so you could support the person, right? And so the same goes for us. And I think sometimes that gets missed, and autism, the characteristics of autism become sort of seen as character flaws, or a lack of character, or a lack of effort on our part, when in fact we're fully efforting and we're just unable or unwilling to do that one thing. Right. So just educate, read as many books as you can, talk to as many people as you can, regardless of the age of the person that you're in relationship with. It will help you.
Thank you. Very valuable advice. I'd like to shift a little bit and talk about your experience as a coach, counselor of autistic adults. I believe you see primarily adults in your practice.
I work with all ages, but right now most of my clients are adults. I have a couple of young adults, but yeah, most of them are older.
So, tell me about some learnings you've had from that experience that have helped you in your own lived experience.
So I have learned so much about IFS from my clients in terms of how they experience their own systems, the ways that they experience their self-energy, the ways in which they experience their parts, the language that they use to describe their parts. I've learned so much about that, and I love that, right? I've learned how resilient they are, all the incredible things that they have done throughout their lives, the things that they've achieved, the things that they've invented and created, and the ways in which they engage in the world that are sort of so outside of these norms. And the thing I love the most is just talking to them, and we sort of have these lovely conversations where we understand one another so easily. So sort of in the IFS space, like they can say something to me that might make a non-autistic practitioner or clinician sort of flinch or think, well, what's that? Is that a part speaking? And what is that behavior? And for me, I understand that what they're saying makes perfect sense. It's just the way of looking at the world. So they've really helped me with my own sort of parts detection skills, right? And the way that I can help them understand, and they are helping me so much as well.
Might you say a bit more about the language that they use? I mean, many of our listeners may not know enough about IFS, but you mentioned the term parts, you mentioned the term self-energy. How do they, maybe start by telling us how these elements of IFS emerge in these sessions? Do they bring them up on their own? Do you prompt them? And then I'm curious about language that they use that might be valuable for all of us to hear.
So a lot of the time I'm guiding. I'm not so much prompting, I'm guiding. And then if we hit, what we would call a trailhead in IFS, we may sort of stay there and explore it a little bit more. I always love understanding when something, an expression, for example, or a thought or a belief is coming from a neurological place, like from that sort of very autistic need to really understand something and have it be correct, right? We are very sort of black and white in how we look at those things. There's sort of the correct way, and then there's the incorrect way. I don't want to say right and wrong because that sort of brings in the moral aspect of it. Mm-hmm. So I'm totally guilty of this with my husband. He may be relaying a conversation that we had, and he'll say, you said this, and it made me feel this. And I'll say, well, I didn't say that. And he'll say, no, you did. You said this. And then because you said this, I felt this. And I can't go to that point of how he was feeling because his language is wrong. I didn't say it. And I have a very good memory for those things. And I almost always remember, he would probably say completely the opposite here. I'm going to say that I remember correctly.
It's okay. You're the guest on this podcast.
Thank you. That's right.
Your word counts.
That's it. He can get his own episode, right? And come in and contradict me. But if he says you said this and I didn't, I can't get past the incorrect language that he's used or his lack of recall to get to the emotion that he's feeling. So I'm going to get stuck on the languaging piece of it, right? Mm-hmm. So that's totally my brain. If I were working with a clinician or a practitioner and I was relaying that conversation and they didn't know about autism, I would imagine, hook into that as a part that doesn't want to give that up, right? Why is it so important that your husband gets it right? Like, what is it? How is that helping you? And then you ask the how is that helping you question, and you think, well, it isn't helping me, and it's just there's the right thing and the wrong thing. There's the thing that happened and the thing that didn't happen. And so it's having that clarity and that understanding of how the brain works that can really help you de-escalate a situation. And for the practitioner or the clinician, you can really help the autistic person. You can really validate their experience by saying, oh, I get why that must be really challenging, right? When his recall isn't so good, for example. Right. And I see why you can't get to the emotional piece that he's looking for. It's not that you don't need to work on that, because of course you do, because right, my husband wants to be understood. So we have had to work on that aspect of it. And it's still like one of the biggest sticking points for us is if he makes what I would consider to be a mistake in his recall, how he's feeling is irrelevant to me, because my brain then goes to the next level of, well, if you're feeling something about something that I didn't say, how am I supposed to fix it? Right? It's like that kind of thing. And so I've had almost these exact same conversations with my clients.
So what shift have you seen in them? Because sometimes there's an aha moment, right?
Yeah.
So maybe share with us a few aha moments that some of your autistic clients had, just to help the listeners and me understand better how this IFS oriented session kind of go or where it takes them.
The aha moments in our sessions often come first from me understanding them. That would be the primary source of aha moments, right? So when I can really relate to a client who's had the same experience as I have had. I actually just had this happen about 2 weeks ago with a client. And he said, you're the first person I've ever spoken to that understood that. He said, every time I've tried to explain that to somebody, they tell me I'm a narcissist, or they tell me I'm arrogant, or they accuse me of being avoidant. And right. So the primary aha moment comes from, the relationship that I have with the client, right? I understand them. I get it, right? So once we sort of cross that bridge, then the aha moments that happen in their systems are just sort of understanding why they may be having some of these responses. I have to say, in my experience of working with my autistic clients, we do way less IFS in our sessions than we do sort of psycho-ed. Because it's the psycho-ed piece, the understanding of why their brain is operating in this way, why they're having a spike in arousal, why they're having this kind of response to something. that relieves so much of the tension in their system. Because if you think about it, for an autistic system that is experiencing these arousal spikes all day long, and then you're living in a world where people don't understand you and you're being told you're narcissistic or controlling, or, it's kind of mayhem in there. And our parts are working super hard to try to lessen the reactivity in our own system, right? So let's say you have an arousal spike. Our parts can often jump into action to try to reduce the sensation because the sensation doesn't feel good. So psychoed becomes so valuable because when you can help a person understand why their body is reacting in this way, why their cognitive process is following this particular path of understanding, if you can help them with that, their parts don't have to jump in to fix things. So the whole system relaxes. So we have lots and lots of aha moments, or sometimes like what we would call in IFS an unburdening, like a more sort of kind of spontaneous unburdening of the tension in the system, just from understanding why the reaction is happening. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Because the parts have nothing to fix. There's nothing to fix. Yeah. It's just the thing that's happening. Makes total sense. The fixing piece comes in when the way we are then starts to interact with the people around us. That's when our parts want to hop in to change it, because the people around us don't understand us, right? And so our parts are trying to monitor those challenges and smooth out some of those wrinkles. And so they're working really hard. But if you can help the person understand their own system a lot more, the parts can just sort of settle down a lot more. So you're going to get sort of less firefighter and manager or protector activity for sure.
Well, very, very helpful, Sarah. Thank you for that. If we were to think more broadly now, might we talk for a few minutes about the context of schools, mm-hmm. the workplace, public spaces? In your view, what could be done in these environments to make them hospitable, mm-hmm. welcoming, supportive, and conducive to better, more enriching experiences, perhaps, for both the individuals and the community in which they find themselves? You've said a lot about personal interactions. I'm just trying to say, what can we do more broadly?
Right, on a larger scale.
On a larger scale. Yeah, how can we scale this up?
Well, I'm a big fan of the psychoed piece. I think it's everything. I feel like every sort of organization, every school for sure, every teacher should take workshops and classes in this. There should be programs to help teachers understand what an autistic student may be experiencing, what the day feels like to them, what it's like for them to be in the classroom, how it is for them to engage with their peers. The more education we can have around these things, the easier it's going to be, right? So that's the first aspect of it. Then from there, we would build out from the micro to the macro levels and the systems at play. So we would change the physical environment of the school or the workplace, so make it more hospitable to the person, have, quiet spaces. My personal mission in the world is to ban people using their speakerphones in public. I think it should be illegal for a person to not wear headphones. Everybody should have headphones on. Like the idea of taking a phone call and you put the person on speaker so that everyone around you is now listening to that. Like that is something that is so completely dysregulating to me. And it's really hard to get people to not do it.
Not to mention disrespectful, right?
Well, that too, right? That's a whole secondary piece, right? But yeah, it's disrespectful and it's so dysregulating. But there are all of these small things that if you could sort of if everyone had the opportunity to see the world through the brain and the body of, to live a day with an autistic brain and body, so you'd see how we experience the world, that would shift everything for sure. But we can't do that. So you have to do education, awareness, lots and lots of conversations like this one. Don't be afraid to have conversations. And then work on the environmental factors, work on the interpersonal stuff, work on the dynamics, and just come to it with as much curiosity and compassion and love and kindness as you can.
And share that vision you just mentioned. about being able to see the world through those eyes. There's nothing wrong with that. I think this is, a very, very important vision to put out there for people to stretch toward. But like you said, people need to understand, and that it takes some compassion. Sometimes I wonder if compassion precedes understanding or understanding precedes compassion. But, it has to be compassionate understanding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, I'd love to hear from you as we approach the end of this very engaging conversation, Sarah. And you said you're very engaged and engaging, and that's very clear to me. So thank you for that. I'd love to hear your call to action to our autistic listeners. What advice you might give them, and what advice you might give their family, their loved ones.
Mm-hmm.
Again, there's no monolith here, and every situation is unique. But there might be some things you'd like to share, almost like in summary to recap.
Okay. I think the first thing I would like to say is for anyone autistic or is to trust your own system. Your system is wise, right? I like to say that autistic babies come into the world stimming. They know what they need. They know what regulates them, and they desperately try to get that across. But the rest of the world doesn't understand, right? And so we're taught to not trust ourselves. Don't trust our bodily responses. Don't trust our need for sameness. Don't trust the fact that, you might need to hold a soft piece of fabric in your hand to, help to regulate yourself on a sensory level. Just trust your needs. Let your system tell you what it needs. And my guess would be it has always done this, but perhaps it's been drowned out by the reactions of the people around you. So really start to listen to the innate wisdom of your autistic brain and body, because it's really an incredible thing. And the more I learn about it and the more I write about it, the more I see that so many of the practices in the world, especially mindfulness practices in the world, they come so naturally to autistic people. Like we're very, very present, because our brains are sort of focusing, right, and trying to filter out this data, and there's so much going on. So we're good at being present, right? And so some of the techniques that non-autistics or the neuronormative populations use to help them with that, we're doing already, right? We're already sort of using lots and lots of repetition, like chanting or mantras, for example. Like in autism, we call that echolalia, right? Where you're repeating the same phrase over and over again because it's soothing. There's so much wisdom in the autistic community. And I would say for the people around us to start listening to us too. So we have to listen to ourselves more. And then we want to see if we can get the people around us to listen to us more also.
Sarah, thank you. Thank you so very much. I learned quite a bit from this conversation. I'm touched by your examples, your stories, your vulnerability. And really, I shouldn't even call it vulnerability, by being yourself with us, by sharing your authentic self with us. I want to thank our listeners for joining this moving and highly informative conversation. Today's discussion affirms to me and to us that autism is not a problem to solve, not a label or a class of behaviors to manage at school, in family, in the workspace, or on the sports field. It is actually a profoundly human experience. I heard you say comfort with the familiar, a desire to be understood and seen for who you are, dealing with noise and signals, dealing with sensitivity, overwhelm, protection, adaptation, questioning, and an extraordinary effort to understand the world in which one may not be fully understood. During these times when quick and harsh judgment, like you said earlier, and rigid misunderstandings seem to be welcomed, unfortunately, by some and are dominating the conversations about differences, I believe we're all warmly invited. And thank you for this warm invitation, Sarah, to cultivate deeper compassion, more caring and unconditional curiosity, sensitivity to you and your needs, the resisting a desire and an impulse to solve and fix things, and our capacity to honor human dignity. To support autistic individuals and families, I see not expecting or imposing conformity, but rather creating safe and welcoming spaces where there's a desire to understand and facilitate authentic connections and value uniqueness. This may be a more hopeful path forward. And speaking of hope, Sarah, having been in the coaching and consulting room or from your own experience, what gives you hope and resilience at this moment?
I think my hope comes from my clients, I think, from knowing how resilient we are as a group, despite some of the challenges and the pain that we may experience. We are a very resilient group. We are the problem solvers of the world. We always have been. And that's what gives me hope, is that we just need to keep creating spaces in which we can flourish.
Thank you so very much, Sarah.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening. Facing the Moment is an independent production of the Foundation for Self-Leadership, a nonprofit committed to bringing emotional, relational, and societal healing and well-being to a world in need. Learn more at foundationifs.org. You can download this and all other episodes on Apple Music, Spotify, and YouTube. Until the next episode, may we all keep facing the moment with grit and grace.